Hi, welcome to the Prologue. I'm Larry Foss, the head coach at the Fix Studio, and with me is...
Mike Durner from Durner Performance.
And Mike, what are we going to talk about today? This is a good one.
This is a good one. I'm excited about this one. Today we're talking about how to race without data or without letting your data influence your race.
All right. I, I had an athlete one time call me moments before their race and told me that they didn't know if they should do it because their power meter wasn't working.
No, you should race. Get in the queue.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the way I look at this is, I think race data is the best data that we ever create. I think that race data is a much better indicator of actual fitness than what we'd see in any kind of informal or formal testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're talking with a bike racer, they want to go race. They want to get in there and compete, and they're going to go harder in a race than they would in any training session. Like, you could ask them to do VO2 max efforts that you're not looking at not going by the numbers, you're just going by effort, and it's still going to come out better on race day than that particular workout. And so
Yeah.
I'm very much of the same mindset. Like, race data is fantastic. And it's so important in shaping how they develop and how you develop the training as a coach.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I agree.
But I think we both agree that, like, letting it dictate how they race is not the answer.
No, and a lot of it depends on the goals. If you're if you're doing any kind of mass start race and you have a podium goal I typically keep the goals down to podium. The podium is the first goal. The placing is a secondary goal, because a lot of it depends on. There's always some luck.
Yeah. I'm even a little more like below that. I'm like, the execution of your race is the primary goal.
Yeah.
And everything after that is like icing on the cake. Like, that's just extra cheese.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
if you do the other things well, I think the podium takes care of itself.
Yeah. For a lot of athletes, I think I completely agree with that. And the other thing is, I try in training to make them connect the effort to an RPE.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going into it and going, "Oh my God, I have no data." So that's pretty. I think that's pretty important in having a realistic RPE as well. I think that if you're not realistic about it, then it's going to bite you in the hind end.
Yeah, I agree. And I try to keep it pretty easy, like scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, I just use a basic board chart.
Yeah, and that way, like, hey, on this climb you're a 7. On this last one, you should be pushing a 9, maybe. But if you're a 10 because the group's 10, that's okay.
Yeah,
you're trying to stay with the group for the finale.
Yeah,
go with it.
Yeah, like, you do not want to drop out of out of the lead group because they're going 10 watts over your where you thought you'd be, and you definitely don't want to go out of the group because you're 5 beats higher than what you think, because if you get dropped, that's one thing. But if you're in sound have sound enough mind that you're making that decision, that's not a good decision. You've got to stick on the wheel until you're dropped. Um, yeah, just
Yeah.
as that's racing.
Yeah. I would much rather hear like, hey, I got dropped from this group because I was doing, you know, 10 watts over my VO2 max for 10 minutes and I was cross-eyed and I couldn't see straight, rather than like I was just like I was right on the edge. I didn't think I could hold this for one more minute, you know, because it's my threshold wattage or
Yeah,
my TT wattage or whatever. Like, no. Like if you can think that clearly, you're not going hard
yeah.
enough to stay with the group. So
I completely agree. So the way I do it is my primary number is the RPE for the entirety of the race, and depending on the elevation and the duration, the length,
mhm.
that will help me determine what's going to be a good RPE for them along the way. The other number that I have most of my athletes they're not a slave to it, but I want them to pay attention to is the IF.
Mhm.
Because if you're doing a 100-mile race and your IF is in the nines, 0.9, the chances are you're probably not going to be able to do that for the whole 100 miles.
No.
So there comes a point where you have to start making some decisions. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
like we were talking before we started recording. One of the ways that I do it is I want them to make a check-in at 15 minutes of the start of the race all the way up to an hour, and then I kind of will extend it out, maybe keep an eye on it and do it check in every 30 minutes to see if it's a pace that you think that you can hang for another 15 minutes
Mhm.
or 30 minutes, and then adjust accordingly.
Yeah. I do something similar. Um, you know, it might involve pace, but it also involves like the parts of their anatomy, like, hey, legs, back, neck, shoulders, arms, whatever, like might be getting fatigued. Like, hey, just kind of do a quick check. Can you keep going at this effort with how your legs feel? Can you keep going at this effort with how your back is feeling?
Yeah.
Can like um that type of thing, and I'll have them do it. You know, maybe if it's a lap style race, do this once a lap, or do this every 30 minutes, and kind of combine it with their nutrition timer so that
Yeah.
they don't have to think about a separate thing.
Right. Yeah. And then when the nutrition timer goes off, they have 2 or 3 things on their checklist. One of them is being the RPE stuff.
Yep.
And for all mass start races, that's kind of the way I look at it. You deal with people doing something a little bit different, and that is that being in Colorado, you are dealing with a lot more like hour-long climbs
Mm-hmm.
and stuff that Midwestern. Most of my people are Midwesterners. That's not something we don't have to worry about a 30-minute climb
No, but you guys have to deal with hours
of
long
wind.
headwind.
That we do.
Yeah. And I kind of try to keep it similar in that, like, hey, know how long is left in the climb. Ask yourself, can you keep this pace up?
Yeah.
How do your legs feel? How does your back feel? Um, Also, the other thing I use is breathing. Like, does does the rate you're breathing right now, can you keep that up for however long? So if you're doing, you know, a 50-mile mountain bike race or a 100-mile gravel race, but in the first 10 minutes, you're breathing through your eyeballs. Is that sustainable?
Mike, that's not a thing. You can't actually breathe through your eyeballs.
Well, uh,
I think I think there's a scene about that in one of those baseball movies.
I think so.
Bull Durham.
But if you've been in a bike race, you know who the person is who's trying to breathe through their eyeballs. So,
oh, I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, like you just know, like, oh yeah, I'm already like gasping for every breath. This is not sustainable.
Right. Right. And, this wasn't part of what we were going to talk about today, but this kind of ties in. One of the things that I have all of my athletes do probably once a week, especially in the first 6-8 months that I'm working with them, is to do nose breathing rides where they're only breathing out their nose. In the way, there's a bunch of physiological stuff that they claim happens, that it lowers cortisol and blah, blah, blah. The big reason that I want to do it is for them to be aware of how they're breathing.
Yes, I think that's a perfect thing. I put that into my race plans. Like, hey, do this, like, especially like at the top of a climb. For mountain bike racers, like, you need to be under control when you're descending. Otherwise, it's a little dangerous.
Yeah.
Bad things can happen. And so do this right at the top of the climb, do that right, like, or in the middle of a descent to kind of regain your composure, whatever it is. But I also like just having people go and like do it during like even recovery rides just to see how it feels.
Yeah. 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 I think, and again, it ties back into the RPE because all this data is wonderful as it is, but if you can't put it in context of the way you're feeling and the way you're breathing in the real world, then it's just data. Having that context to tie numerous things together is, I think we did a podcast, I don't remember when, but we talked about basically the three legs on the stool: the RPE, the heart rate, and the power. That how those all kind of have to coordinate when you're doing efforts, and it's the same thing.
I 100% agree. I think our bottom line is like using these pieces for athletes to learn more about their body, and the more they learn about their body and how it reacts to certain stresses and stimuluses and efforts within a race, the better off they're going to perform in the long run.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. Now, one of the ways that a lot of people may use this is where they will use power is during time trials.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't work with a lot of time. I've worked with a lot of time trial people over the past, and I've used some guidelines, but I never want to get too attached to any of them, just based on. I think the day of performance, if you focus too much on it, you can. I've seen more times that an athlete finishes a race and is like, "Oh my God, I could have went harder. I could have ran a higher heart rate, or I could have ran a higher power number," and the data reeled me in. Mm-hmm. So you got to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt. You still have to use your best judgment. If the wattage or the heart rate number is like, man, this doesn't feel hard enough, then you have to go to that RPE.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to get to work with those para athletes at the national team level doing time trials when we go abroad, and constantly, or every race, like, let's really only use your power for the first couple minutes. maybe it's 90 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on how long that race
Yeah.
is, to keep yourself under control, not go out too hot, because it's a pretty common thing for our athletes to go out really hot, get it up to speed, and then 8 minutes in, they're gassed. They're
Right.
gasping for air. And I had the opportunity this past weekend to spend a lot of time working with my personal athletes on a mountain bike time trial that started with a road climb. And I said, hey, for each one of them, here's your power for the road climb.
Yeah.
And it's all under threshold. And then the next, 9 miles of this time trial are mostly single track. So hit it hard there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about this one road climb. Because if you go into that first descent gassed, there's a lot of rocks you can hit. And if you hit the wrong one, it might not be good.
Right.
Even if you hit the right one the wrong way, it's not good.
Well, and the other thing you're dealing with is, I mean, on most time trials, what I tell people is I want them to roll not easy, but I don't want to see them over like typically 90 to 95% of their threshold for the first 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of time that they may lose in that section, generally, I'm not that worried about it. And then make the decision after 5 minutes of how much they can throttle it up, and do it that way. Check in again, making that mental check of how am I feeling now? Can I maintain this pace for, like, depending on the time trial, 10 to 15 minutes, or is this going to blow me up?
Yep.
And obviously the more race starts anybody gets, the better they're going to be at all of this stuff. So,
oh yeah,
very, very important.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else, Mike? What do you got to add?
Listen to your breathing, check in with yourself, and don't be afraid to push beyond where you think the limits are.
Right. And the one thing I would say is that when you're at altitude, you want to be a little bit conservative, because once you go over, you're over, and you're probably not going to have enough. You're not going to have enough real estate to recover and get back on it correctly.
Not even at Leadville do you have enough real estate to get back on top of things if you go too hard too early.
No. And that comes back down to knowing yourself, that if you're going to ride 100 miles at altitude and you're not if you're not completely acclimatized to it, you've got to be conservative, and the power numbers aren't going to, especially at altitude, those power numbers and the heart rate numbers are just not going to be very, very useful unless you've spent a fair amount of time knowing how your body is reacting to that elevation. So, all righty. Well, that's a wrap. I'm Larry.
And I'm Mike. Thanks for coming to the Prologue.
All righty. Peace.